Jim Herd is coming up to his first year as Executive Vice President of WCW and making most people's lives miserable. Venue attendance has tanked, viewership ratings have lowered a bit. Who's the person you would ask to speak to if you wanted questions about your directions or matches at this time? So basically, who's like in charge of you, or who would be your liaison to the office at this point?
Well, again, it depends on where you were standing. If you were at the building, out, like say they're running Dallas. If you were in Dallas, it would be somebody in the building. I would later find out that Jim Herd was quote unquote ultimately the final arbiter of things, and that the infamous story of me having my final discussion with Jim, as condescendingly as he possibly could have put that talk, turned out that he wasn't quite aware of what he was looking at. Jim was brought in. My understanding at the time was because he had been successful at Pizza Hut. And, I say this all the time. It's not like wrestling is some monolith that's impossible for anybody to crack and figure out if you haven't been in it. Obviously, you're going to know much better if you have been in it and been successful in it. It's really... It plays in between all the genres. It's a genre unto itself. It's not really acting, although acting does come into it. It's not really sport, although athleticism does come into it. It parlays itself someplace in between, all of those entities. And so it's never really 1 foot this or 1 foot that. And the same thing with business. I'm sure Jim Herd, as a CEO of a company, probably knew where to turn the buttons and which nails to hit, but doesn't mean that you're going to have any clue of how to launch and create a character. I always talk about the nuances, right? The nuancical stuff. That's the stuff that's damn difficult to pick up. I'm sure Dutch probably has his own euphemisms for that, but having been successful like Dutch has been at booking, looking at somebody and coming up with a character for that person, and then figuring out how to push that character and foster it along until it becomes like a household name or successful, which I guess would be the same thing. That's where the great bookers separate themselves from everybody else. Anybody can go, okay, James, let me think here. I'm going to make you a bath separatist, or I'm going to make you a this or a that. Right? That's easy enough. Now, how do we take that and make that character make sense? How do we digest it? Because remember, we got a lot of kids watching. We have adults watching. There's a big span of age groups. The ones that are great at it, the ones that have done it successfully, they know that stuff very, very well. And I would bet last dollar to a dollar that Jim Herd wouldn't have any more idea of how to do that than any fan watching this podcast right now. And that's probably being condescending to the fans because the fans that watch, I doubt that Jim Herd was much of a wrestling aficionado. In my few discussions with him, I don't recall us ever getting deep into the philosophy of character development or anything like that. It was all about money and this, the business side of stuff. But he was ultimately, if you remember me telling the story, I was just going to fly straight home whenever I walked out of WCW in Baton Rouge. And I called Eddie Gilbert from the airport, and Eddie said, don't fly direct to Pittsburgh, fly through Atlanta, spend the night and come see Jim in the morning, because he was the one that smartened me up to the fact that decisions were being made in the office. And then when it would get out to the field, say Dallas or Pittsburgh or Cincinnati, it would change out there. And then if Jim would ask anything about that when they got back, hey, I thought he was supposed to win or this one was supposed to lose, they would say, oh, well, something happened or they screwed up or whatever. They put the heat on the talent. And so we had these multiple brain trusts. The brain trust that was in the office that never came out to the field, the brain trust that was in the field, then the booking committee where it was, the circular booking committee where they could all point the guns at each other. And it was just an absolute epic how not to do this. And, it doesn't stand to reason. It's not Jim Cornette's fault that Jim Cornette was looking out for Midnight Express on that booking committee, or that Flair was looking out for his stuff with the Horsemen, or that, each of these little fiefdoms and the rest of everything else just sort of floated around like flotsam and jetsam in the Ethernet around WCW. And I think that probably was the beginning at the end. You know, the WCW had died years before the body hit the floor. All the little witticisms that we use, you know, the lunatics running the asylum, and you know, Jim Herd thinking he's directing something from Atlanta, and then something different's happening out there. Then the heat's being put back on the talent when they come back to Jim Herd. No industry, no business. If you run a hamburger stand, you could run it that way.
Or a pizza stand, of course,
or a Pizza Hut. Yeah. Yes, which, by the way, I think is, you know, when I was a kid, Pizza Huts were ubiquitous, and now they're fairly few and far between compared to what they used to be. I think Jim Herd was actually probably before Kip Fry, when he was handing out those huge contracts to everybody. And then you had people like Ole coming back in, and then Bill Watts, who had these really old school thoughts about contracts. And I just was talking about Bill Watts the other day, and when it came up, talking about the guaranteed contracts. And I remember Bill saying multiple times, guaranteed contracts will be the death of this business. And, you know, within a few years, suddenly everybody was stubbing their toe and couldn't wrestle for 6 weeks. You know, and we've seen so much more since then. The problem was each of these guys had their own different philosophies on the business. Kip Fry was lavishing money out. Then these Oles and Bill Watts came in, and to them, like when they were that age, they weren't making but this much, and so now they're making this much, and they think you should be making that much, like they were back 30 years ago. And it just created this whole atmosphere, oxygen in WCW that just everybody was just waiting to see, okay, like each time the carousel comes back around to this point, like who's in charge today? Okay, it's going to go around. Who is it today? And the next time it comes around, who is it now? And it was always somebody. I mean, how many times was Vince Russo fired and brought back? Bischoff let go, come back. Then it's Bischoff and Russo together. Then it's Russo. Then it's Bischoff. I mean, it was this just like crazy, just lunatic way of running a company. And you can imagine in a company that's in a business profession that's predicated on creating characters, creating intelligent storylines, and fostering that along. Well, they're all playing Peyton place back at the office. How much time was being put forward to any kind of the nuanceical stuff, the stuff that makes wrestling great, and very little, if any. And so that really, I think, is the epitaph of WCW, and it's a shame because as we talk about Halloween Havoc this week, we'll get into a lot of what I think really separated us from WWF at the time. And instead of augmenting those things that we were great at, they were in this point of trying to somehow, like, 1 foot here in sports entertainment and 1 foot old school, and again, just how not to do it.